Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. What an honor it is to bring in a cat who really was at the forefront of Marin County music back in the early 60s. He went on to have a very decorated career in all different genres of music, but he came up at a time when there really wasn't a lot of music within the academy. Certainly languages, street languages like jazz had not been codified in the academy, so you could kind of make up your own rules, and my guest did, and as a result got to play with folk outfits, bluegrass, blue-eyed soul, rock, throw in a little bit of jazz, a lot of experimental music, but it's all music, as Duke Ellington said, and my guest continues on today. Searching for that sound. Rob Moitoza, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you, Jake.
I wanted to ask you about two guys and where you consider them as far as fathers or even grandfathers of Marin County music, that being Pete Lind and John Allaire.
Yeah. Well, John was one of the first people I ever saw play music in Marin, and he was a wonderful keyboard player, and we used to sneak into the bowling alley. They had a lounge back there where John used to play with his little organ trio. So that's the first, just about the first musician I ever saw in Marin, and we were very impressed with the B3 playing of John Allaire. And of course, Pete Lind was his drummer at the time, and a very fine drummer.
Were they, was it a duo or a trio? Because I thought Champlin and Haggerty were sneaking in, and they said they were playing in a duo. I mean, it's kind of, it was just, that was really the thing that was vogue back then, was organ drums,
it might have just been a duo. It might have just been John Allaire and Pete Lind. I think once in a while they would have Doug Cox on guitar.
Wow. Jesus, this is deep. I mean, so that was, okay, so for you, that was the first cat that you saw live. In retrospect, are there other grandfathers of Marin County music that you can give a shout out to? I mean, to me, you got all the cats from Quicksilver, the Sons. I mean, you guys are all from the same generation, but Pete and John are definitely from an earlier generation. Are there other cats you can give a shout out to at all?
Yeah, let me say one more thing about John.
Go ahead,
before
man.
I do.
Yeah.
And that is that he's been playing with Van Morrison the last few years, and he's recording an album with Van right now. So,
dude, he is I knew that too. He's Van's first call cat,
Yeah.
I mean, the dude was just like, he also, for what it was worth, was part of the only side project that Phil Lesh was ever part of outside of the Grateful Dead, with Haggerty, John Allaire, and a great drummer, Steve Mitchell, Too Loose to Truck. So he had, to me, like, he clearly, were they playing like Bill Doggett tunes, or was it more like Fats Domino rock and roll, or was it kind of a little bit of everything in that bowling alley?
Well, he was Jimmy Smith.
Wow.
He was the Jimmy Smith guy. Of course, now Jimmy Smith came a little bit later, so I don't know. John was all over the map as far as what he liked. I mean, Fats Domino was always his favorite, but he also could play Bach fugues on the organ.
Oh, my God.
So his two favorites were Fats Domino and Johann Sebastian Bach.
You're darn, and I think Jimmy, Jimmy Smith definitely, in terms of jazz, that was his man too, definitely. Were there other, even, I'm fast. San Francisco gets all the pub. I mean, Cal Jader held down the fort at the El Matador, and Brubeck was always at the workshop. But were there? So San Francisco is very well documented, but Marin County, were there anybody else that you wanted to pay tribute to that sort of was from that earlier generation?
Well, Adam Foreman and the Custom Keys. Custom Keys were probably the first rock group I was aware of back then.
Yeah. No, that's before the Swingin Deacons, right?
Yeah, and that was with Dean Ferguson on guitar and Otis Biggis on keyboards, and that was way back, probably the late 50s, early 60s.
Wow. And Foreman.
That was about
Go ahead.
Yeah, they're probably the first people I remember from back then, and then the next band I saw was probably the Ramrods with Bob Alpocton. He played down in the middle of Mill Valley when there was still a bus depot there, and had been the first rock group I ever saw. And of course, they were doing Chuck Berry and things like that, And I went, that's what I want to do.
Wow, dude, that's some that's deep, man. I mean, what was the instrument? Were they doing like outside of Chuck Berry? Was it like Bill Haley and the Comets or Hank Ballard? Are they doing like R&B stuff too? Or I mean, that to me is like, this is like,
yeah. I think Chuck was the first guy that I really loved on guitar, of course,
Sure.
Not only was he a great player and singer, but he was just the greatest writer, I thought. He just tuned right into the high school kids and fast cars and the whole thing that kids were into at that point.
Sure.
So that was, he was the first guy I ever heard. And so most of the bands at that time that I saw were emulating Chuck Berry and Little Richard and all of those early rock and roll guys.
I'm curious about, it's always interesting to me, you go back to Elvis, Bill Black, or obviously a lot of the folk stuff that was going on, but the bass player in that rock band from the late 50s, was he playing upright or was he playing an electric bass?
You mean in the Custom Keys?
Yes.
I don't even think they had a bass player there.
They didn't even have a bass player?
I don't think so.
Wow.
I think I was one of the first electric bass players in Marin County. I might have been the first one.
That is so freaking class. Dude, that would be the sickest thing. We need to get that on the record, man. So I guess ultimately, what was the instrumentation of the band, and I'm always fascinated by this because you go back to someone like Oscar Peterson and Stan Getz with Ray Brown and Herb Ellis, a drummerless quartet. It's like, missing the rhythm section, and I wonder about that idea of maybe looking back on it, just hearing music without a standard bass, and the ability to then use your imagination to fill in where that bass normally would be. And
yeah. I mean, I don't know for sure that they didn't have a bass, but I can't remember a bass player. So, you'd have to ask Winston Searles, or he's still around, I think, one of the
oh my God, dude, I got to connect with who was that cat?
He was a guitar player with Custom Keys years and years ago.
Custom Keys, man. That is...
Custom Keys is spelled with a K.
I know. I figured, man.
Of course. Well, and then the guitar player, who was the other guitar player in Custom Keys, Dean Ferguson, I hooked up with him later on, and we started a band called the Chord Lords.
Well, no, my dear friend Dan Healy is obsessed with the Chord Lords because his pal Cipollina was in that band. But I wanted to go back to the other cat I really want you to talk about. I've done a couple interviews with Champlin, and he talked about the first time that they were at a women's club in Sausalito, or you were in the band with the Deacons, and Foreman was playing, and John invited Bill up on stage, and that was the first time he played. I think that was maybe the first gig he played. But can you talk about the Swingin Deacons? I mean, and also Adam Foreman. I mean, that dude, did he leave us very early in his life? Because Bill said that he was, well, like we've been talking about, he was right up there with Allaire and those cats.
Well, Adam Foreman and John Cipollina and Steve Regalia played drums in that band, and I was on bass. And that's the first rock band I ever really played in. Well, there was one little thing before that called the Invaders.
Right.
With a guy named Ron Story. But anyway.
Did you guys get paid? Did you guys play gigs, or was that more just sort of playing around? And
we may have played a couple of gigs, but not very much.
The Invaders,
that was the first time I had ever played. And Ron Story was a guitar player who tuned his guitar very weird. The first 3 strings were a chord, and the second 3 strings were another chord.
I love this, dude. That's exactly that's beautiful. I mean, that must have been so insane, dude.
And he's playing to this day. He has a group in Tampa, Florida called the Tampa Bay Travelers.
Oh my!
And they're still playing the same songs. They're playing Ventures songs.
Oh my God!
Yeah. So they're staying true to the form. Whereas I never stay true to the form. I always have to keep moving on.
Hey man, no, I think that got embedded in you from your folks. I mean, the rhythms and the angular stuff that was coming out of your house, probably when you were in the womb, is like, I mean, you're just all over the place, and it's beautiful. I mean, so, but when you talk about, can you talk about how you met, John Regalia and Foreman, how that band came together, and then you guys definitely were playing some surf rock, but did it venture into some experimental music too?
No, it was too early on for that. We were just kids,
Man, that's where I want to be, man. That's exactly where I want to be.
Yeah. So, the first time I ever met John, he lived right down the hill from where I lived in Mill Valley. And I was out there as a little boy playing in my Zorro costume one day with my toy sword. And John comes up with a real sword. And I go running into the car and lock the doors.
Oh, wait, what's the big hill that he lives on the top of? What's the name of that again? I'm blanking out.
Well, he was on Shady Lane.
Well, no, because Gene, I was at that original house. Did you ultimately get to know Gino pretty well?
Not real well.
Yeah.
But I knew him. He was a nice guy. And I knew Evelyn. She was really great.
She was an amazing pianist, I think, right? I mean, she was brilliant, man. Mario said he used to, at 11 years old, would just be sitting on a hill outside the house smoking a joint, listening to Nicky Hopkins and his mom playing duets together,
Yeah, he had very cool parents. They were very, very cool, just like mine.
All right, so he came down with a real sword, and then you locked the car. and
Yeah, and then I don't know how we actually hooked up as far as playing in the band. I can't really remember. I remember John came up one day and brought a bunch of old Lightnin' Hopkins records and Muddy Waters And I remember the first time I ever heard Lightning Hopkins, I was like, God, he changes in the wrong place.
Yeah, right.
I was like, it's awful. And then I ended up buying every Lightning Hopkins record I could get my hands on.
Let me ask you, Rob, like, explain to younger cats especially the evolution of you sort of at first saying, oh, this sounds awful, and then growing to actually love that imperfection because the music was so greasy and hot.
Yeah. Well, and it goes deeper than that for me.
Go ahead.
I ended up later on being an alcoholic. And Lightning Hopkins was the ultimate alcoholic, you know. And even though I wasn't that far into it at the time, I think I related to Lightning Hopkins, you know, his whole pain thing with his, you know, his love life and his lost women, and probably because he was a drunk. That's why they didn't stick around, you know. But, yeah, I think the old expression, misery loves company, you know, I think that was, even though I lived up in the hills of Mill Valley in a beautiful place, and, you know, by outside appearances, I had it all. But we were so isolated, I think I was kind of lonely up there or something, you know, and being a young, you know, adolescent, you know, I didn't know how to relate to the girls, even though I grew up with two wonderful sisters.
Well, I appreciate your honesty. You're not alone. I mean, that boat is full of and people that are masking, or by appearance they seem okay, or they put up a good front. And I'm not even just talking about musicians; it could be anything. But
yeah,
you know, I appreciate your candor on that. I just am more, you know, setting aside we all deal with our own demons and things like that. I wonder about you could talk about the appreciation for music that wasn't absolutely perfect. I mean, I really come from that school that imperfection is perfection, or, you know, Miles, who I know you met, there are no wrong notes, or just the idea that like. The idea that John, I don't know if you know this bass player from New York, John B. Williams, but he, you know, that VSOP band with Freddie and Wayne and those cats, like, Ron C. had like pneumonia, couldn't make the gig, so Herbie's like, who should I call? And Ron's like, call John B. And so John goes out there, they're having a rehearsal, and he played a note or a chord that was just off, but Herbie put a chord right on it. You know, he put a chord on. It was always about putting a chord on it, because not just that you were picking up your teammate, but ultimately sometimes those clams would lead to new musical vocabulary. So I just wanted to talk about that.
Somebody said if you make a mistake, just play off that.
Yeah, just keep going. Yeah, keep going.
Same mistake
right.
Twice.
Yeah, that's Miles, I think. Yeah, yeah, that's such a great. Yeah. How did you learn to get comfortable doing that musically?
I don't know if I ever still have. But, you know, I think the best quote I ever heard on that was John Coltrane said, well, you play all 12 notes in your solo anyway.
Yeah. I mean, coming from him, you know, it's pretty awe-inspiring.
I mean, it got to where he could play any note and make it work, you know.
Absolutely.
So, but early on, I don't know, I was pretty much of a perfectionist in a way. I mean, I wanted to play everything right, you know. But I don't know, something, as I say, with Lightning Hopkins, it might have been more the feeling and the songs that he wrote. And I just got totally immersed in Lightning Hopkins. He was one of my favorite blues players of all time, you know. And I don't know, as far as the mistakes.
Well, like you said in the Swingin Deacons, for instance, it was, you guys were kind of running, like playing 3 or 4 minute tunes. You weren't stretching out or trying to be experimental. It's like getting into that experimental zone is kind of what I'm getting at, because ultimately when you sort of go fishing, you know, you just kind of got to lay it out. You got to lay out. I'm just wondering when were, recognizing like, maybe not every note was absolutely perfect, but it felt that the whole feeling was good. The band felt good, and clearly the audience wouldn't have recognized it anyway. That's the funny thing. The audience would never realize mistakes anyway.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it was later on when I got more into jazz is when I really started thinking about those things. So I don't know back then whether I was that aware of all that stuff or not,
You were, I mean, he was one of my earliest interviews, actually, and I was so touched that you were so close with him, was the late, great George Duke. And so, Duke, was that your first introduction to jazz? I mean, he was already playing pretty sophisticated standards at that point when you met him.
Actually, the very first time I heard jazz was Bill Champlin. His mother took us to the Black Hawk in San Francisco. There used to be a club there called the Black Hawk. And they had a miners' night where they had actually put up a chicken wire screen on one side of the audience.
The Peanut Gallery, right?
Huh?
It was the Peanut Gallery, where
Yeah.
You saw Oscar Peterson with him.
Yeah, Oscar Peterson Trio. And I went, whoa. It's the first time I ever saw Ray Brown play, who was one of the greatest bass players ever. At the time, he was the greatest,
Dude, that dude, it was so cool. I mean, and so badass. I mean, just listening to that guy talk, too. Those guys could say 5 words, and they were the most profound words ever. And then, every note counted with them, too,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I want to read.
Yeah.
I want to. So that was, you guys were. What year was that? 59 or what year did you see Oscar?
Well, it was probably early 60s.
So I'm gonna ask you. I did my 5th interview with Dan Healy, and I want to read this to you, and then you can riff on it. He said, "Jazz was really happening in the early 60s in San Francisco. Most of the clubs had jazz groups either nightly or on the weekends. There was a place in Sausalito called Gatsby's. They had jazz on Sunday afternoons. There was a guy named Lou Morello who played vibes, had a sextet with Pierre Josephs, who was a fabulous bass player. And basically that's where Healy started his very early recordings he would record the bands because, what he said, he goes, nobody could hear themselves back then. You didn't know what you sounded like. There was nobody recording the stuff. Were you going to Gatsby's on Sunday afternoons for jazz and things like that?
No, I wasn't really aware of that place. The place that I remember, though, the most was the Trident.
Oh, dude, let's talk about that, man. It was
Saw Bill Evans.
Oh,
Bill Evans
man.
trio
With Scotty or with Eddie Gomez?
No, I wish it was. I never got to see Scotty.
Yeah, he was gone. He died before. That was he died before the Deacons. I think he was even he was dead by 62, I think, or something.
Yeah, and that's about the time the Deacons were happening. So, yeah.
So you would go to the Trident. Who'd you see with him at the Trident? The Chuck Israels, maybe? Yeah,
I think it was Chuck Israels. Yeah.
Can you talk about I guess the aesthetics of just that you know what it is, Rob? I love music. I don't care what the genre is, but when I put on Bill Evans with Chuck at the actually I have that record. It was there was a recording at the Trident with Israels, and I think Larry Bunker. But when I listen to that, and I listen to Village Vanguard, Evans with Scotty and Paul Motion, I could listen to that side A, side B, side A, side B, and every time it never sounds the same. Every time it sounds different. It's this idea of never playing the same song the same way once.
I think one of my greatest regrets is, I was a big Scott LaFaro fan. He was my favorite bass player, and who actually turned me on to Scott LaFaro was George Duke.
Absolutely.
he told me, "Oh, you got to check out Scott LaFaro." So of course I did, and yeah, there's something about his playing. And the unfortunate thing is that not only did he die way before his time, but he had a bass method that he was writing, and that burned up in the fire with him.
Really?
And so that would have been, just priceless for us bass players, because
Yeah.
I still to this day don't know what his theory is on how he solos. Because sometimes I don't even think he's really following the changes. Maybe he's only following the time,
Fascinating stuff. That's fascinating.
But he knows exactly where he is, and he comes back in right. But he's either playing so far out of the chords that you can't follow the changes.
Well, you just answered my question very beautifully. That's exactly why it never sounds the same way once. It's like always, because he's playing free but he's playing with the time, but not necessarily with the changes all the time, but it still works.
I mean, he might be playing with the changes, but it's way too advanced for me even to this day. I would love to have talked to him or read his theory or something, to know more about what he was actually trying to do. But he's still, to me, one of the greatest bass players of all time. And yeah.
Well, I just wonder. I wonder with you. Like, did you? I mean, were you inspired enough after seeing cats like Bill Evans and did you start shedding on the upright for a while? Did you play like in your own way? Did you play jazz in the mid-'60s?
No. In fact, I played in the Tamalpais High School Orchestra, and I played string bass in the orchestra.
Wow.
And I was learning string bass, and George Duke was playing keyboards in the orchestra. But he was playing Miles Davis tunes, and I was still learning how to play the Walk, Don't Run.
I know. I read that in your bio, but I mean, like that. So, but after the rehearsals, would you guys get together and play smaller ensemble stuff?
There was a little rehearsal room off the back of the music room. And Duke and I would go in there and jam every once in a while,
That is so freaking classic.
I don't remember exactly what we played, though. And it had to be pretty simple because I was not nearly in the same league with George Duke. But Duke was such a great guy that, if you played, and
he was such a that man was like, and he talked about that fertile. Did you actually ever go? What's really fascinating is Duke lived in Marin City, and it was a pretty rugged area. Did you ever go over to that part of town? I mean, it's so different now, but like back then, it was really tough area.
Well, yeah, I wrote out my whole music history a while back, and I have a whole section about that because, we all loved George Duke, but I was never at his house, and he was never at mine. And when I think about that now, it makes me very sad because it was like an unwritten rule, I guess, that we didn't go to Marin City or what, I don't know. It was like there was this underlying racism going on that we just didn't even know about.
Totally, dude. Totally. It was a segregation.
When I think about it now, it makes me really sad because we really should have, my little high school band did a show where we invited George Duke, and we had some other, some of the students, black students, and we did a show where we were trying to get everyone together because there had been some racial strife at TAM, So we organized a little show there in 1963.
Wow, dude!
And that was great. But I think I was so naive. I was a naive white boy from the hills of Mill Valley. I don't even think I even really knew how segregated we were until years and years later it dawned on me. And it dawned on me one day when the KDIA, which was the soul station over in Oakland, and that was the station that Bill Champlin and I listened to a lot,
Well, that was where Sly Stone started, right?
Pardon?
Wasn't that where Sly started as a DJ? Sly Stone?
He was on another station, KSOL or something.
So KDIA, I know, yeah. So you and Champlin were rock. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut off this yet.
No, I don't know. I might be drifting off your.
No, it was fine. You said you didn't realize you were a naive guy from the hills, but you didn't realize how segregated you were till you were listening to KDIA one day. You said.
Well, I came back. This was after I had actually moved away from Mill Valley. This was years later, and I every time I would come back home and get into the Bay Area, I would turn on KDIA right away.
Sure.
So I turn on KDIA, and I'm sitting at my parents' house up in Mill Valley, and they said the KDIA, I don't know what they called it, but it was like a record wagon where they would go around and give out records and stuff, And he said they're going to be coming to Corte Madera, and it was just a few minutes later I went, oh man, I'm there. I gotta go down, So I get in my car, go down, and by the time I got there, they had already left because there was nobody in Corte Madera interested in KDIA. And that's where I went, because I always felt like, my favorite music was always soul music and funk and black music. And in a lot of ways that played against me because white people were not into funk and soul at that point, and black people didn't want to hear white people doing it. So where was my audience?
That you nailed, dude. That's
I had none.
Unbelievable.
And that kind of followed me through my whole life. I realize now, if I had liked country music or something, I probably would have had a lot more success, but I didn't. I liked soul music. So, in fact, I had a black drummer friend of mine from up here in Seattle who, he always wanted to play with Huey Lewis, and I wanted to play with James Brown. I said, Charlie, if we had just switched around what we liked, we might have had some success by now. And in some ways, though, the times have changed so much. Now everybody sounds black,
Absolutely.
And so maybe I was born in the wrong era,
So I just want to be clear, though, like KDIA exclusively basically black soul music. There was no white cats copying black cats, and so like when they showed up with the record wagon, Corte Madera was so white that nobody was into KDIA, right? Except you.
Yeah. And that was it. Kind of it woke me out of my stupor, I guess you'd say, because I went, oh my God. This is really how segregated this area is.
Well, it's America, man. That's America.
It's funny because we had, I knew a lot of the black students there and considered them my friends. And some of them I'm friends with to this day. But we didn't go to each other's houses. And it was really like kind of a polite, we were polite to each other. So when I've gone to my high school reunions, man, I've made it a point to go over and say, hey, what's happening?
Yeah, right, dude.
Because I feel like we wasted a lot of years there, with stupidity. And I think it probably was a carryover from my parents' generation stuff, My parents, they were funny because they loved everybody. If there were black people that came up there, they were fine. But then they make racist comments and stuff. It was such a weird time, I guess,
You mean
weird,
like after the black people left, they'd make comments, or they'd say it to their face?
Well, it's just like everybody was different or something. I don't know how.
Yeah,
exactly
no,
how to
it's you have no idea how much I can
relate.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, just the dog whistles and the cat call. You know, you're nice to their face, but then the true colors come out behind their back. You know, it's just a very, and I just guess it has so much to do with just being so separated and somehow fearing the unknown. I mean, and that fear
Exactly.
turns to hate.
Yes.
You know, it turns
and
to.
I think it's because that's how we grew up.
Right.
You know, and which is so sad when you think about it. You know, I had. Well, I don't want to get too far ahead, but in the 70s, I did a lot of work with the women's movement. I played with a woman named Holly Near, and I knew a lot of women involved in music, and some of my very best buddies were gay women. And, my parents would say, "Oh, who's that lesbo?" or you know what I mean.
Wow.
But then when they met them, they were fine. Oh, come on in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to. That would make my heart break a little bit. Actually, I don't know. It's just hard to. My parents were straight ahead. I mean, it was never that sort of like, well, we're just. Your parents were much more traditional, typical. And let me be very clear, it was not just part of, the Bay Area, Marin County. That was all over the country, too. I mean, that's still to this day is. But I want to be. Yeah, go ahead.
You were right on about it, too, I think, because it's really unfamiliarity is the whole thing. We're afraid of the unknown. We're afraid of what we don't know. You know, as soon as you meet somebody of another race, you're best friends. I mean,
dude, here's the scary part. It goes from, it's not just the unknown that makes people uncomfortable. It's that the unknown then turns to fear, and then fear turns to hate, and that's the problem. It metastasizes, so you hate something you don't even know about. That's the problem.
Which to me is exactly what we're seeing now with the whole Trump era.
Absolutely. It's so there, it's so transparent, and yet millions of people are walking around like zombies, and that's just fine. They'd rather bury their head in the sand, and be fake. Be nice to you.
Again, it's so sad to me, because it's so unnecessary. We're all brothers and sisters on the planet.
Absolutely, man. Every man's your brother. There's a couple things I wanted to ask you about.
Mm-hmm.
Were you in Champlin? Because a lot of people think James Brown and started funk music. I mean, James Brown and the Flames, they were definitely on the Chitlin circuit. But were you hip to Johnny Talbot?
Yeah, I remember the name, but I'm not real familiar with his music.
He was doing ferocious. He was doing ferocious organ in Oakland. It was it was like soul jazz, but that was the original funk. Did you get a chance to go over to Oakland at all, or was just off the radar because you were kind of sequestered in the hills of Mill Valley? I mean, clearly.
Well, we were so young then, we probably wouldn't have gone all the way over there. But the thing is, I remember the Sportsman Club.
Don Barksdale, totally, dude. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we played at there was a place in Albany called the Lucky 13.
Oh, dear.
And we played over there a couple of times, and that's where we met a guy named Bill Bostic, who was a great singer, and his dad was the famous sax player.
Earl Bostic?
Yeah.
Earl Bostic?
Yeah.
Really? Oh,
pardon?
That's incredible. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So
and we did it. And now this is interesting too, regarding what we were just talking
Go
about.
ahead.
Because the band that I had, Just a second.
Sure.
Did that change the sound?
No, you sounded great all the whole time, but no different.
Well, I bought this little harmonic mic. I wanted to see how well it worked. But
You sound good. No, you sound really tight.
Now it's in. Did
right.
that change anything just then?
Not really.
Not that much.
No.
I'm just curious.
It's all right.
Okay.
I just hear a lot of input and output of the plug. Yeah.
So, Bill Bosdick, and the group that I had with Champlin was called the Opposite Six. And we arranged to do a show at the Gate Theater, which was in Sausalito.
Wow.
And
well, how do you spell that name? The Gate? Gate,
Gate.
Wow.
It was an old movie theater, but it was really nice, and the acoustics were good. It was good for music, So we rented the hall, rented some police, the whole 9 yards, and rehearsed the heck out of the show. And nobody showed up. we played to an empty room, and I still don't know why. Maybe because it was a venue that people were unfamiliar with. Maybe because it was a multiracial event.
Interesting.
I don't know.
So, but prior, that was the first gig you had done with Bostic?
Yes.
Okay, and before that, the gigs you were playing with Champlin, people did show up.
Yeah, and they would show up, for the coasters. Some acts like that were black.
Wow, definitely mixed race. That's why. That's amazing.
Yeah. But they didn't show up for that show, and they missed probably the best show we ever did.
Yeah, well, that always happens. The best shows are done in front of 3 people, that's all the jazzers talk about that, man.
I always like to say the best shows I ever did were backstage before our show. Yeah.
Well, no, were you involved with in the Opposite Six? I'm having these flashes when I interviewed Raul Matute. He talked about Rod Ellicott. Were you part of that? Were you playing multi-instruments in that band, or were you on?
Well, that was Cold Blood. Now you're talking about.
Okay, so the Opposite Six would, the
Opposite Six happened after.
The Swingin Deacons, the Deacons, the Chord Lords, dude. Now, hold on, I just want to be clear. Who was in?
I'm kind of jumping around.
No, this is a jam. This is what it's about. No, who was in the Lords? Was it the same outfit as the Deacons or different?
No, completely different. It was Dean Ferguson, who was the guitar player with the Custom Keys,
right?
And John Kinzel on drums, and I don't know what his history was. And then Dave Eddy on rhythm guitar, and myself. And that was Chord Lords.
And Cipollina too?
No. In fact, I quit the Deacons to go join the Chord Lords because Dean Ferguson was such an amazing guitar player. And that's an interesting story too, because Dean Ferguson was, technically way beyond John Cipollina. Mm-hmm. But John Cipollina was an innovator. He was learning a style and
Totally.
So, and all we were doing with the Chord Lords was playing the Ventures and, I forget, Mickey Baker songs and different, instrumental things mostly. And but we were getting the gigs at the Corte Madera Recreation Center and stuff because we were a little more mainstream. You were palatable to a square audience. You were playing recognizable stuff. Which, in a way goes back again to what we were
absolutely,
talking about.
Dude. Absolutely.
Now that I think about it, because really the Swingin Deacons were trying to play blues, and you know, we were kind of the bad boys of rock, like, you know, the Rolling Stones compared
Totally,
to the Beatles.
dude.
You know,
Yeah, no, yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
But then I opted to go with the Beatles guys, you know.
sure.
And years later, I went, God, I wish I had stuck with John, because he was developing a unique style. And between my writing and his playing and stuff, we might have come up with some really cool stuff, you know. But I'll never know now. It's way too late now, you know.
What in your at that time, you know, ultimately, what, you know, there's an argument to be made that, you know, Garcia came out of the folk scene, Barry Melton did, Yorma did, but yet the two real serious innovating rock guitarists were John and Jerry Miller from Moby Grape. You think that's a fair assessment to make?
Yeah, and of course Haggerty, you know.
Hags right after Haggerty was like, I know, because Haggerty was playing jazz. I remember this cat. I can't remember his name. His dad's very famous. He's a badass too. Tim Weston. His father was a big. I forget his dad's name, but he said when he heard Haggerty, he was playing jazz chords through rock music. I mean, Haggerty was doing something completely off the grid, you know.
Yeah, because his dad played in the NBC studio orchestra, and so he learned jazz. In fact, his dad never thought much of him playing rock and roll.
Dude, his dad was the nastiest guitar. I mean, Hags has talked to me about how unpretentious those studio sessions were. The guys would go down there, open up a bottle of Chivas Regal, you know, and like crank out a couple of, you know, jingles, and, you know, and he'd be playing on these flotillas, you know, these you know, that Terry would go see him at these Chinese restaurants, you know. I mean, the guy was an avatar player. His dad, and I'm sure he did not think much of that rock and roll scene. You know, I mean, you would say, so, you know, you take the Square gig. Obviously, there's more gigs. You know, you were getting paid and stuff. But what was your what like? Did Cold Blood come next, or did you go to L.A.? Explain. Like,
I'm sorry, just a second here.
Sure,
Jake.
sure.
Say again.
I'm curious about, you know, you knew. I guess maybe the better question is, how come you didn't join the Sons at their inception?
Oh, because the band I had was Bill Champlin in high school.
Yeah, the opposite six. Got it, right.
And we all were right under the gun for the draft.
That's right.
The draft came up, and so I went out and joined a 2-year reserve program that the Navy had. And I felt like that was the best deal I was going to get.
Yeah, you wanted to stay out of Vietnam, you know?
Yeah. And then Rich Rogers, our drummer, he joined the Army. But we were all on the verge of the draft. And Bill and, Bill.
Was it Ellicott? Or?
He got out of it because he was married. That's right.
Wow.
Or, yeah, I think so. And some of the other guys, I'm not sure. Well, Tim Kaine, of course, was disabled, so he wasn't eligible. He went down there anyway, though. He went down to the draft board with his cane and stuff.
Wow. Wow.
They said, what are you doing here? You know? So, that's a typical Tim Kaine style, man. I love it.
That is unbelievably classic.
Yeah.
So by the way, the Opposite Six, was that the first time you were playing original tunes, would you say? Were you writing original music?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And how would you describe, was it the kind of music that, you know, I'm not saying it was free jazz.
No.
Would you leave the head of, would you leave the head of the tune? Were certain tunes lend themselves to improvisation, or was it all kind of just straight 3-4 minute?
Yeah, I mean, we were starting to learn how to improvise, but we weren't exactly.
No, that's the best part. I mean, the
masters.
best part is you're feeling your way through it, but that's where, you grow at that time,
But when I think about it, it's kind of interesting because I was thinking, the era that we're in now is very visual.
Totally.
Everything is
Yes.
dance and and the opposite six, we had little routines and footsteps worked out, and we had the nice looking coats, and in a way, it came full circle because during the '60s. God, we just kind of saunter up there on stage and drink a beer and then maybe play a tune. You know what I mean? Became very loose during the '60s. But, early on, we were pretty sharp. We were a sharp little band,
You were, but you weren't at that point going over to... at that time, the Fillmore district was still all black, commerce-based. In fact, I interviewed one of the guys who was the house pianist at Bop City, and he said that back then the only three white cats that would come over to the Fillmore district were Bill Evans, Chet Baker, and Vince Guaraldi.
That's probably about right.
Yeah, man.
The only time I went over there was probably to see. I saw Rashawn, Roland Kirk.
You saw Rashawn in the Fillmore.
No, it was a place called the Both And or something.
The Both And Club, dude. I love it, man.
Yeah, and I got to see Rashawn there, and I saw Coltrane there.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
On the Divisadero, right?
Yeah. And then the only other club that had jazz was Jazz. It might have been called Jazz Alley or something. It was up on Broadway.
It was like Basin Street West?
No, that was another one.
Right.
There was one called Jazz Alley, and that's the first place that I ever saw Miles Davis. I got to see Miles Davis there because he hired Tony Williams, and Tony Williams was still underage. And so they had an underage night at Jazz.
Oh, that's so hip. That is
Jazz
so
Workshop.
freaking.
That's what it was.
It was the workshop. Yeah,
it was.
absolutely the workshop. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I almost feel like, maybe you. I don't know about the Both And. I don't know if Coltrane. I don't know if that club was even in existence when. I mean, Train died in '67. You might have seen him at the workshop. I don't know.
Maybe.
Did you just for the record? Did you happen to see the late great Pharoah Saunders? We just lost him.
No, I didn't. I didn't see him.
Yeah, he was those guys were. How much did those guys inspire? I mean, this. I don't want to. Cold Blood was a ferocious. Were you in the? Was Benny Maupin in the group when you were in the group, or
no?
Who was in the? Yeah.
I was in the group early on because, I joined the Navy, and then that's where Bill Champlin started the Sons of Champlin at that point.
Right.
And I wasn't involved in it because I was in the Navy, And then right before I left to go in the Navy, I had heard Lydia Pence singing with a band called the New Generation or the Generation, something like that. And that was with Rod Ellicott. And I went, man. And she was doing the entire Apollo Theater Volume 2, James Brown at that point,
So ridiculous.
I went, oh, my God, And so I vowed that I was going to play with Lydia Pence when I got out.
Because you wanted to play with James Brown. She was the next best thing, right?
Yeah. So when I got out, I did. I ended up hooking up with her, and Rod didn't want to play at that point or something. So I played in the first year or two of Cold Blood, and then my alcoholism got in the way, and I was getting kind of enamored with the band because they kind of didn't. Lydia would be kind of sitting over in the corner and they're rehearsing the tunes and not even asking her what key she wanted to sing it in or whatever. I don't know. So I kind of got, a little upset with the band. And between that and my alcoholism, that was it for me. It was Cold Blood,
Right. Well, okay. I mean, part of it, Lydia, I interviewed Lydia and she talked in her own words about, she was kind of an introverted person, even though she was an amazing stage presence.
Yeah.
So, did you guys, when you played live, would you play on those Bill Graham dates with Malo and the Preservation Hall Jazz Band? Did you get a chance to share a bill with Quicksilver and those cats?
Yes. In fact, that's one of my most memorable gigs I ever did was with opening for Quicksilver because John and I hadn't seen each other since before I got drafted, before I was in the service.
Yeah.
And so then I joined Cold Blood, and I remember playing with Cold Blood, being on the stage at the Fillmore. It was actually that Carousel Ballroom.
Carousel Ballroom, interesting. Yeah.
And I remember that was a great room to play, by the way. But anyway, I remember being up there playing, and all of a sudden, here comes John carrying his guitar case, and he walks right in front of the stage and waves at me and goes backstage. And I was like, wow, old home week. It all came around.
Dude, I just got chills. Quicksilver is not a go-to band for me. I think live I would have lost my mind seeing them, but John Cipollina, man, like his soul. I've been on this trip 11 years, and I've been to that house on Shady Lane, and I feel.
Well, he was a unique person,
Yeah, I want you to just talk about in your mind. I think that's just so beautiful that he shows up right in front of you at that show, and it's like no time has passed. But can you just talk a little bit about what you think? He was an innovator. What do you think his legacy is to modern American rock music?
Wow. Man, that's a tough question.
Yeah, welcome to the Jake Feinberg. We can do set. We're going to have to do set too. So if you want to think about that, it's just like Haggerty. Everyone kind of carved out their niche. So did John, but you knew him.
Well, the thing is that it's so much of the entertainment business is about not about music, but about personalities.
Absolutely.
Right. And I've thought about that often, because I always thought that John was such a unique personality, and he had a look. He was very visual way back then. Nobody looked like John, and he was very unique in all his amplifier setup that he.
Total, dude. I've chronicled that whole rig, man. That dude was way ahead of his time. And you're right. He had long hair, but he wasn't a hippie,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a very unique guy, and he went down. He actually knew the guys at Standell Amplifiers because he loved Standell,
Yeah, right.
So he went down there and met with them and everything, And then he had that great setup with the trombone horn.
Absolutely, yeah. He had the trombone bells and everything. Yeah.
But that's all really what rock and roll is.
It's personality and attitude. Because to me, part of it's also. The one thing we can't overlook in some respects is just that fleeting period of time. I guess you were probably in the opposite six, or maybe even in the Navy at that point. But just the legal LSD that was available. It was legal, so that the crowds and the bands themselves. I mean, you could kind of go off and just throw the script out the window. I mean, and I just wonder about, you know, well, I've talked to enough cats from that time. David Nelson sitting behind the amps when the Grateful Dead would play their one stretched out tune for the night, and the audience would be heading for the exits, like in droves.
Wow.
You know, like, I mean, and then all these producers and other people would say to Garcia, can't you just play this one hit tune? You'll get so much more audience. And Jerry just be like, what's the point? Well, you know, what's the big? And I just feel like John also, you know, yes, he was an entertainer. Yes, he had attitude. He was a great showman on stage. But man, you know, I just don't think Quicksilver gets enough credit for being able to take people on a real journey musically, you know, in the rock.
Well, you know, when he came up one day after they had done that first album, and he came up and played me the cut that he had really been responsible for, called The Fool.
Yeah.
And that guitar solo, when he does these things with pick slides and everything, nobody was doing that then. I mean,
that's what I'm talking about, dude. Yeah.
I went, whoa, John, this is cool, you know. And then, of course, they got involved with Tino Vanelli and all that, and it just went in a whole other, as far as I'm concerned, very dark direction. But
no, you're right. You nailed it. I mean, you know, Rob, we just burned through 62 minutes here, and I mean, we got to do set 2, but I just want to wrap up set 1 with, because you know, you wanted to be Ray Brown, you love Scotty LaFaro, you know, ultimately you weren't playing a jazz bag, but I was in a record store in Tucson here. I'm sorry, it was a thrift store in Tucson before the pandemic, or even during the pandemic. And I found this Holly Near record, and you're on bass, and Roy McCurdy's on drums.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
yeah,
you got to play with freak. I mean, because, you know, the interesting thing is that you knew George Duke, you know, way back in Mount Tam, you know, Tam High, but one of my favorite jazz outfits is Cannonball's band from '73, which had George Duke on all types of ARP synths and keyboards. The rhythm section was Walter Booker and Roy McCurdy. It was Nat and Cannon, and then this is where it gets crazy. Ernie Watts on horn, and then Airto and Buck Clark on African percussion, Airto on all kinds of different gadgets, and then this crazy, amazing psychedelic LA studio cat, probably like right on the edge of the original Wrecking Crew, was Mike Dacey. It was a crazy band. And I was like, wow, maybe that was the first time Moitoza saw Roy McCurdy. But it was just so cool that I saw, because that to me was what music was about. I'm like, Moitoza and McCurdy cooking the groove with Holly Near. You know, that's what it's about.
Pretty funny combination.
I love it. Yeah. That's what it's about, man.
Well, the thing is, all those guys were available for studio work if you had the money to pay them.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
See, I probably never would have gotten to play with him if it wasn't for Holly, you know, hiring him, you know. And then I had a song that I wrote in the 70s that the producer I had got Lee Rittenauer and Harvey Mason to play on.
Oh my! I'm not even hip to that.
So I got to play with Lee and Harvey Mason, and one of the biggest mistakes I ever made was Harvey Mason wanted to put that song on his album he was doing at the time, and I passed on it because I was too tunnel vision into we were looking for a deal for me. You know what I mean? And that was one of the biggest mistakes I ever made, because that was nominated for a Jazz Album of the Year or something, Grammy.
Wait, hold on. You're saying what was the year this went down?
70. Let me see here. Let me see if I have it.
Yeah. I just can't believe that Mace was like, yo, I want to use that tune, and you're like, no, dude.
It was around 72 72 or so,
Wow.
I would say.
And
but anyway, yeah, and the thing is that we did a really great production of the song. And so, we were all trying to get me a deal, an artist deal. And but I learned a big lesson from that.
Well, I just want to be clear about something. You were in the Sons at that point, or who were you writing the song for?
No, I was probably with Holly Near. No, I was just writing songs for my own.
Oh, you were writing tunes. You were living down in L.A. at that time, maybe, or?
Yeah.
And so, one of the tunes you were writing, Mace wanted to put it on his album, but you were trying to get a deal for yourself, so it never made it onto whatever album that was.
Yeah, it was an album called "Marching in the Streets."
Dude, on Arista, that was 1975. That album came out. I cannot believe. Well, dude, that is so mind blowing. What was the name of the tune?
It was "For Imagination's Sake," which the Sons later recorded.
Holy cow! That is so. I mean, you've sort of been always. Clearly your writing is great. It's appealing to guys that were part of that, I hate that word, fusion movement. And, I mean, the Sons were the most sophisticated band by far in the Bay Area. I mean, there really wasn't even a close second, I don't think. I mean...
Well, that probably played against us, too.
Of course it did. I mean, but, like, at the end, it took me a long time, and I'm talking about a lot of some of the Sun stuff is before you joined them officially. But, man, it took me a minute to really understand how freaking badass that band was. Like, compared to the rest of the skiffle cats, who I love dearly. But those cats were skiffle players. And, that appealed to the hippie nation. But, I mean, the Sons, like, that stuff.
Well, I think the average listener, my dad put it right. He said, "Remember, Rob, you're not playing for musicians."
I dig, man.
Now,
I dig. But, I dig.
That,
that's right.
People relate to a simple song that they can sing along with and clap their hands to or whatever and pick up the girls or whatever,
Totally. But, I mean, but you can't, just because, well, and I just also believe that there was also this mentality from guys like Bill Graham who recognized that, but also said, I don't care. I'm going to put cats on these bills because the audience needs to hear this stuff. Maybe it's not going to be so simple and freaking, jingly and remember, but there's these catchy grooves and these hooks, and I want people they need to dig this stuff.
Yeah, that guy was really quite a guy.
Yeah.
Bill Graham. He knew what he was doing. Boy, I'll tell you. Yeah, but see, I was always really, we were talking a lot about jazz, but I was really always the funk guy. I mean, still probably my favorite band I ever played in was Cold Blood.
The funkiest band. Funk.
Yeah, but we were mostly just doing covers. We didn't do anything really very innovative, Of course, the Sons was a whole different thing.
Lydia didn't write original tunes for Cold Blood?
No.
You were doing cover. Were you guys trying to go after like random rare covers that weren't often covered a lot, or was it generally like, or was it even...
No, we actually did stuff like "Piece of My Heart."
Wow.
And straight ahead R&B things that we had heard.
When did you first get to see my heroes, Paul Jackson, Mike Clark? Was it with the Headhunters, or because they were cooking the groove in Oakland for a long time before that?
I don't know if I ever saw Headhunters.
I'm just saying, like, that to me, when you say funk, that is the funkiest stuff. I mean, I know that what people say with funk, whether that's...
Well, I think where it started was really Papa's got a brand new bag.
Yeah, of
It
course.
was really started with James Brown, probably, because I was a huge James Brown fan. And I went to see him, God, I don't know how many times, but all the way back to a place called the Sweets Ballroom in Oakland.
Yeah, totally. Would you actually go? Did you see him when he was James Brown and the Flames?
Yes.
Yeah, that's freaking amazing. Because that Chitlin circuit, I mean, up in Richmond and Concord, did you ever? I remember talking to Rocco, and he was talking about Frenchie's, which was a place that the Extension 5 played a lot at. Did you? Just wrapping up set one here. Would you go and check out black bands on that black Chitlin circuit? Did you ever play on a Chitlin circuit or just any touring circuit with the opposite six? I mean, regionally.
No. There's no. In fact, I heard a story that Cold Blood, after I left, played in a black club it might have been Frenchie's. No, it was someplace in San Jose. Frenchie's wasn't in San Jose. I don't know. But
it was called, I know the black club in San Jose was called Popeyes.
Well,
that was a jazz. That was like where John Turk and Clifford Coulter played. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
Yeah.
But the story that I got from the horn player, the old horn player from Cold Blood, is that they played that club and got booed off the stage. The black club didn't want any part of
dude. Booed off the
soul music. Yeah.
Oh my God.
And that would have broken my heart. I'm glad I wasn't on that gig, because if they had booed Lydia, it would have just broken my heart, because we loved soul music, and we loved the whole genre and the whole, so it would have been. That would have been hard to take.
Thank God you missed it.
I understand it, because black people think that we were ripping off their music, and a lot of people were. But we just loved the music.
Yeah, you guys were not part of that freaking, Tom Jones, singing, whitewashed, versions of that stuff. That's what made them upset. And I don't blame them, because they
I don't either.
But yeah, and then it comes down to like the authentic cats who just love that music, and but maybe they had a rough night. They had an off night. Who knows? We got a lot more to get to, Rob. I hope this was enjoyable, man. You're one of the cats that you're an important part of the lineage here, and I had a ball, man.
Oh, thank you, man. And really appreciate it.
And we'll let's plan to do it again in a couple weeks. All right.
Okay, sounds good. I guess there's a lot of the other stuff to cover that I never even really thought about.
That's what the Jake Feinberg Show is all about, is extracting information that either you haven't thought about since the time or maybe never even thought about. So
yeah. Well, we kind of jumped all over the place here, but
that's what it's about, man. I mean,
hopefully it makes some sense. It makes as much sense as us hippies ever made.
Right? Hey, man, at the end of the day, you throw it on the floor, and all the puzzle pieces eventually come together, man.
Yeah. All right.
All right, man. Be cool, man. Yeah. Later.
Bye.
Bye.